I am now 27 years old, and events like this have haunted me throughout my life. I was raised with my grandmother and mother in a simple little house next to what used to be a large mansion. It was my great-grandmother's house, and everyone, including her grandchildren, called her Mother Legia. What I have heard about her leads me to believe that she was a woman with a very strong personality, who even went so far as to confront her husband with firewood from the stove. She was a strong Italian woman who spoke loudly, was very kind to the poor, but also very strict and angry. I even saw when I was little. Her eyes follow me around the living room several times. There is a painting of her and my great-grandfather in a picture frame. But what was really impressive was that sometimes I would wake up at night and see a female figure passing by the foot of the bed towards a telephone that was about 2 meters to my right, and as soon as she got there, she would disappear. One night, my grandmother woke up to the sound of people washing the stairs of the house, and the stairs were near the window of the room where we slept. I didn't wake up that day because my grandmother didn't like to scare us at all, but the next day I found out, overhearing her telling my mother in the kitchen. She heard buckets of water being thrown on the stairs and a broom being swept. My grandmother thought that there might be potheads in the house, so she got up and went to check. But as soon as my grandmother opened the door, the noise stopped and the stairs were dry. Because of many of these things, I always knew that there was someone or something there. Some people said that my great-grandmother was evil, but that's a contradiction, since she fought with my great-grandfather, who was against the food she distributed to the poor on Sundays. Well, when my aunts visited my grandmother's house, my cousins arrived. My mother's 2 sisters came, each with their children. I was about 10 years old. We spent the whole day playing in the abandoned mansion. Me, my younger sister, my cousins Juliana and Luciana, and my cousins Andre and Anderson. The latter was responsible for what happened that day. We started playing at trying to hit the empty water tank, which was on top of the mansion, with guava sticks that we picked from the tree or picked up from the ground. I don't remember how we started talking about Mother Legia, but Anderson kept bad-mouthing her the whole time, saying she had been a bitch, annoying, and things like that. At that point, he managed to hit the guava inside the empty water tank. We heard the noise and even clapped for him because it was so hard, but as soon as he turned his back to the water tank, the guava followed the same path back and hit him in the back. That was enough for us to run away from there, and the subject almost became a myth. After many years, I married a friend of my cousin, and one day I told him what I had witnessed in that house and mentioned this fact. My husband looked at me scared and said that when he was a boy he had actually heard that story from my cousin, but he never took it seriously, thinking it was a joke. But seeing me talk about what happened so many years later, he became serious and scared. To this day, my grandmother lives in the house next to this abandoned mansion. She tells me that sometimes she feels people near her, but she never said it was my great-grandmother. But I know that house is haunted. In the summer of 1994, my then fiancé, our 5-month-old son, and I moved into an old house in a small town not far from Sao Paulo, a little over an hour's drive. Our house was right next to a very dangerous bend in a local road. The only thing that made me uneasy was that the backyard of the house was no more than 1 meter from the road, where cars were speeding too fast for the bend. But even that didn't discourage us. We were super happy with the house, since it was our first home. Everything went smoothly until we settled in. I instinctively knew from the beginning that there was something strange about the house. I had had this feeling before on other occasions, in other places, and they were never wrong. Shortly after we moved in, we started having problems with our son. He simply wouldn't stay alone in his room. We had never had this problem before. Every time I put him in his crib, he would cry and only stop when we picked him up. He would be alone in any other corner of the house without any problems, except in his room, where he would scream so much that it seemed like he was going to explode. I also had my problems with some rooms. I never went into the garage or the maid's room. I don't have an explanation for it, but just walking past the maid's room or the garage made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and a chill ran down my spine. A while after our wedding, which had been in July, I was in the living room with my son and my sister-in-law. It was still daylight and very bright, but we saw some shadows moving on the living room wall. At that moment, I called a friend of mine to see what was happening, and as soon as she got home, she felt something strange. She also started to see some strange things. Shadows in the living room, the feeling that she was being watched, noises upstairs when no one was there, and doors closing by themselves. We told my husband about these things, and he just said that we were imagining it all. Around Christmas, he changed his mind. We put one of those little musical lights on the Christmas tree, and every night I would unplug it before going to bed. One night, he woke up to the music playing and the lights flashing, illuminating the hallway outside the bedroom. He woke me up and said that I had forgotten to turn off the lights. So I told him, I turned them off. You were there, and I saw me unplugging them. He sat up in bed and looked at me with a confused look on his face. He got up and tiptoed out of the bedroom and down the stairs, and found no one else in the house. Then he came back, his face pale, and he didn't say a word. I asked what it was, and he simply told me to go back to sleep. The weekend after that, our son went to his grandparents' house. The first night without him, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard the sound of a baby crying. Since our son was not at home, we simply ignored it. But the crying started getting louder and louder. We got worried and went to the garden of the house, thinking that someone might need help. But outside we could not hear anything. When we went back inside, we heard the crying. We went in and out of the house a few more times, and it was always the same. Outside, nothing. Inside, the sound of a baby crying. Then my husband stopped at the bottom of the stairs and saw that the crying was coming from upstairs. To be exact, from a small room that we used to store junk. Needless to say, this completely terrified me. I ended up convincing him to move our bedroom and our son's bedroom to the lower floor of the house. But after that, things really started to happen. Some things would disappear and only reappear after a few days. It wasn't uncommon for me to lock the maid's room door to keep it closed and to put chairs in some other rooms to keep them open. I hated having to go upstairs to do something upstairs, especially when I was alone. I always felt like my heart was being squeezed. Not to mention the garage. It felt like there was always something lurking inside me, ready to attack. For some reason, the only room where I felt good and safe was the bathroom. I hated being alone in that house, but it didn't really matter to them whether I was alone or not. Nothing ever hurt us, but we had so many scares that it felt like our hearts were going to stop beating. Later I found out that the house had had many tenants, but none of them stayed there for long, never more than a few months. We were the first people in many years to stay in that house for more than a year. The owner of the house lived almost next door, and our house was in his family, and for years. He never said anything about the history of the house. Either he didn't know or he didn't believe it. A friend of his family found out that we were in the house and told a friend of mine that we should move out as soon as possible because that house was not a safe place to be. He knew one of the families that had lived there. He said he was afraid for our safety because he knew of some violent demonstrations that had already taken place there. He said it was incredible that we were still there after so long, that we hadn't left on our own. The family he knew had only been there for 1 month. When they were there, heavy objects were thrown at them. Doors would slam shut in their faces. They would wake up in the morning with bruises all over their bodies. They would wake up at night with the bed shaking violently. Things like that. After hearing this, I said to my husband, "Honey, we're leaving." We moved out the following week. Since the house was built right in front of a dangerous curve, Do the spirits of victims of accidents that happened there end up in the house? We all think so. Who knows?